Okay, so this module, as I said, it's a module on population dynamics, and the aim. Okay, so I mean, I am faculty at ICTS, and the work that I do is sort of on theoretical ecology and evolution, and so we do a lot of this through the perspective of StatMech, and you might feel, oh, how is that? How can you do ecology with StatMech? So I think this kind of answer you might get a feeling for by the end of these four lectures. Yeah, but we'll start small and move sort of as we go. The big picture view that I'll give of you is that in ecology and in population dynamics, we are usually interested in what happens out there in nature when many species of organisms are interacting with each other, right? And so does anyone have a sense of, how many species we know of on Earth that exist? Just order of magnitude. Millions, some people would say billions, some people will say, well, what is a species anyway, right? But it's clear that there are many different kinds of organisms that are out there, right? And actually, it's not obvious how it is possible that so many organisms are out there and they're all surviving and coexisting with each other. And at first it might seem like, oh, what's the big deal? And again, sort of part of, as we go through these lectures, you'll maybe be able to appreciate why it's actually a hard problem, why it's actually shouldn't be that easy for these millions of species to all be there. Even if they arise in some way, how is it that they continue to coexist with each other, right? So this is another question that we might ask of ourselves as we go around, take walks in forests or hikes and so on and so forth. Why is it that we see it this way? So again, we're going to try and use methods from both physics, but also methods from nonlinear dynamics, which some of you may have been exposed to, many of you may not have been exposed to. So this course is also like a crash course and a course in disguise on nonlinear dynamics. Yeah, I already mentioned that I'll give you readings. Some students often ask me about textbooks. There aren't really textbooks per se that we have for the field. This is still a new and emerging field. But if there's one book that I really encourage you to read and that will be useful as you go through this module, is this book by Stephen Strogatz called Nonlinear Dynamics and Chaos. I might even recommend some chapters to read from this as we go through our lectures, right? So if there's one, and I think you can get a copy online. So yeah, please try and take a look at this book. Okay, all right. So usually at the beginning of my lectures, I'll put up something just to give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about literally everything that was in the reading. These are things that I think are interesting and fun. So there's really three main things that we'll talk about today. The first is we're going to talk about the simplest way that you might think about single species population dynamics, and we'll talk about this model called the model of logistic growth. And here we'll see that this is really the simplest way that you can have of modeling an exponentially growing population that doesn't grow on forever but reaches something that we call a carrying capacity. Right? And again, as we go on, there might be lots of terms that you might think are biological. If they're not clear, please ask me. And so in this case, we'll see today that there's only one stable state. There's only one stable fixed point, so to speak, to which the population goes to as you wait infinitely long. Right? The second thing that we're going to talk about is a slightly different version of single species growth, where you don't have exponential growth forever per se, but you have something we call cooperative growth. Species might like to be with each other and grow faster if there are a few of them around. And so the simplest model of that is this model called the alley effect. And in this case, we'll see that there are really two stable states that are possible. And so this will be our first way to look at biostability. And then finally, later on towards the end of the lecture, if I get some time, we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about what it means for models to be continuous in time versus discrete in time. And we'll see that actually can make a big difference. So we'll go again and look at logistic growth, but in discrete time. something that's called a logistic map. And here we'll see that while in logistic growth, we just had one stable state that was possible. In this case, based on how you choose just one parameter, you can either have you can either have one stable state, you can get oscillations that get crazier and crazier, and in fact, you can also get this behavior which we call chaos. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's start. Okay. Okay. So can I also have a quick show of hands for people who had a look at the reading that I sent? Okay, good. So most of you look at it, right? And so there was this quote in the beginning of the reading, right? Yeah. So what did people try to work out what that number is? Yeah. For those of you who don't remember, there was this game where basically you have a chessboard, you have one grain on the first on the first square, you double that on the second, double that on the third, and so on and so forth. And then how many grains do you end up with?
2 to the power 65 minus 1.
Yeah, I believe it was something like 2 to the 64 minus 1. But okay, I mean, yeah, but yeah, did someone actually calculate what 2 to the 64? I mean, 2 to the 64 minus 1 is 2 to the 60. 10 to the power 19 grains, right? Yeah, okay, so that's 10 to the 19 grains. And does someone know, I mean, roughly how many kilos of food is that? How many kilos of food we produce on the earth?
50 million.
300 million what? Tons. And 300 million tons would be what? How many kilos? A ton is 1,000 kilos, right? So that would be 10 to the 9 kilos. Okay, so I mean, these are some numbers that I pulled up. So it turns out it looks like we produce 10 to the 12 kilos of food on Earth every year. So yeah, can you see how many years that would take to make that much grain, right? And so I mean, the reason that I like this quote, the reason that I think it's kind of fun, is that it really kind of tells us this power of exponential growth, right? At first it might seem innocuous. Oh, you have 1, and then you have 2, and then you have 4. But by the time you get to 64, it'll take tens of thousands of years to produce as much grain, if the only thing that we are producing on Earth is this grain, right? Right, so I mean, you know, in all of this, when we write these models, it's easier to sometimes forget a sense of what these numbers are. And so yeah, just keep that in mind. But let's think about this a little bit. You know, we want to talk about population dynamics. We talk about growth, and we just talked about something being exponential. Why should we care about exponential growth? Why should populations grow exponentially at all? Can someone give me a simple reason? Why not linearly or something else?
The rate is proportional to the number of
the rate is proportional to the number. Oh, okay. So you mean something like if I were making a model where I was tracking the number of individuals that were growing per unit time, that's what you mean by the rate. So this will be the growth rate of the population. And then what did you say that? This should be what?
being proportional to the number of the NHS.
Okay, so you said some constant R times the number of individuals, right? Okay, I mean, that of course produces exponential growth, right? Can everyone see that? But why should populations, like, why should this be a good model of what populations do?
If you have more people, then there would be more offspring.
If you have more people, you'd have more offspring. That's certainly true. But, you know, you could have had, this model would also do it.
It also depends on how the individuals are sort of interacting with each other, because this would mean somewhat like each of them is interacting with all of the others. Like,
You're talking about this one with the square?
Mean that, but then is that always true? Doesn't have to be. So if we make an assumption that none of them are influencing how the others behave, then it sort of makes sense for us to take the rate of change to be proportional to just number of individuals.
Okay, sure. It might have something to do with the interactions, right? But let's say you have a completely non-interacting population, right? Would you there not expect any exponential growth? Yeah.
If we assume that per capita, each individual is reproducing at some set rate, so then if we can look at dn by dt over n, which is per capita growth rate, we're assuming that to be constant, and that's why we end up with this.
Yeah, so that's completely true that you can talk about the per capita rate, right? And does everyone understand what we mean by per capita here? So this is the growth rate of the population, and if you want to take the growth rate per capita, means per number of individuals, you take something like that. And sure, I mean that's just a rearrangement of this equation, right? This is a constant, right? That's what this equation is saying, right? But I guess what I'm trying to ask is, yeah, is there something that we know about what living things do, what they do to reproduce, that must make it so that growth must be something exponential like? Yes.
If we consider a bacteria or
Yes.
bacterium,
Yeah.
then it's going to divide into two always. So then it again follows the geometric progression. So that geometric progression can be modeled by exponential.
Yeah, perfect. Basically, the main thing is that life, you don't get life from nothing. One cell only arises from another cell. One being only arises from at least one other being, right? And so this process, one cell going to two, which goes to two again, and so on and so forth. This is not that different from Caesar's grains, right? And so we know that life does this, right? Living things do this. It's very hard to imagine living things just sprout out of nothing, right? And so you need more life to create life. And so this is the simplest way to think about it. This will produce something that's 2 to the power something, right? But that's as well. You can convert that to be e to the power something, right? Okay. Good. And so it's true that the simplest model of this kind of a growing population that we can write down is one where the per capita growth rate is a constant. Is this model good? What would this population do if I were to plot the number of individuals with time? What would this do? Right, so they'll just keep growing forever, right? And that's not something that we expect to see, right? There's another way to see this. You can plot as a function of the number of individuals what the per capita growth rate is, right? And so for this sort of model, what's that going to look like? It's just going to be a constant, right? And so you can see that basically, no matter how large the population gets, it'll just keep growing at some per capita rate r, and that's a problem, right? So how do we fix this? Okay, let's just take a bunch of choices. Okay, so one other thing that we'll do in these classes is that we will make you all sort of answer some questions, right? So I'll put up some options for you, and you can each take by like about 10-20 seconds to think about them, and then if you want to say yes or no, you can just use your thumbs up and thumbs down. And if I give you multiple options, then you can basically do 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so we'll take a vote. Okay, how to fix this issue that you grow forever? Okay, I give you some options, and then we'll vote on whether or not they work. Okay, so first is add a death rate or a per capita death rate. Okay. Okay, and let's say that k is less than r. Okay, take 5 seconds to think about this, and then we'll vote. So in your vote, think about if this fixes the problem of growing forever, say yes. If it doesn't fix it, say no. Okay? All right? Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, it would be great if everyone voted. I mean, this is not graded. I'm not looking at anyone in particular. This is just for us to get a sense of. Okay, I would say most people say no. Okay, can someone explain why this won't work? R already includes the death rate. What do you mean by that? Can you explain that a little bit more?
I mean, even if we add another death rate and K is less than R, the per capita growth rate will still be positive.
Yeah. And so what will that do to this curve? This was R. This will become R minus K, right? And that's still positive. So this population will still keep growing on forever. What will happen here? This one will saturate at what point? Yeah, so what should happen? Right, yeah. This is actually going to be much easier if I just plot the log of n. And what does this look like if there were a log of n? The original thing will look like that with the slope of r. This one will look like that with the slope of r minus k. Okay, so that one doesn't do it. Let's say this. You can add a total death rate as opposed to a per capita death rate, and I can call that k. Okay, do people understand the difference between a per capita death rate and a total death rate? Okay, think about this for some time. Okay, let's take a vote again. Ready? 3, 2, 1. I see a majority of people not voting. Don't be shy. You just vote something, whatever your intuition is telling you, even if you don't have a mathematically precise answer. Okay, shall we try and vote again? 3, 2, 1. Do you have a question? Okay, sir. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, I see most people saying that it won't work. Can someone explain why?
You just drop it by a phase, it's still dropping.
So what does the equation look like now? Does it look the same? So it looks like this, right? Okay, what does this do? Okay, so does this population always grow? Okay, does it depend on something?
Depends on whether n is less than r from k by r.
Okay, so what happens if n is less than k by r?
Then the growth rate is negative, so it just decays.
Yeah.
And when it's larger, it's positive. So
And does it grow forever then?
yes.
Okay. And why?
Because if it starts growing, it will become more positive. So it'll keep growing.
Yeah. Okay. Did everyone get that? Basically, now the per capita there's a per capita growth rate, but there's also a per capita death rate, right? What's that? K over n, right? And what does that look like? It looks something like this, right? And then you have to take this minus that to give you things. So there's a critical n below which the population will die, and above which it will keep growing forever, right? So in some sense, this also doesn't fix the problem. what about adding a term, adding a death rate, again a total death rate that looked like kn square. So kn we already did, right? That's a per capita death rate of k is a total death rate of kn. Would it fix it? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, I would say that there's some mixture of yeses and nos. So what I'll have you do is just turn to your neighbor and try and convince them that you gave the right answer. And hopefully by the end of the end of this, we'll have flipped one way or the other.
I have a question for the previous.
Yeah.
So if we add a total death rate K to the per capita death rate equation.
No, to these dynamics. This,
Alright, so like,
yeah.
Initially we had written 1 by n, like per capita,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
growth rate equation.
Yeah.
To that, if we would add a total death rate K,
Yeah, I mean,
that would be equivalent to the third case.
Total death rate by definition means that it's a death rate of the population, right? So no matter what, yeah. Okay, for some reason people are reluctant to talk to their neighbors. You're not happy with the neighbor you have? Or everyone managed to convince their neighbor that they have the right answer? Okay, let's try and vote again. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, yeah, I would say most people have flipped that this works. Can someone explain why?
Mathematically, you have two stable points. One is n0 and the other will be n equals r.
One is n equal to 0 and one equals something in the middle, right? Okay, great. And what does that look like in this curve? Good. Okay, so what does that look like here? If you do something that looks like that, right? You can rearrange things. Is that right? Did I do the math right? Yeah. Okay, and you can just call r over k some other thing, capital K, let's say. Does that equation look familiar from your reading? Right? So what should I do to this curve? What would the per capita growth rate look like as a function of n? Would it now be a constant? It would be a decreasing function. Yeah, that's true. What kind of decreasing function? Right, it would be a linear decrease, right? And at n equals 0, you still have r, right? And you decrease until at some n you hit a per capita death rate which is 0. And what's that n?
K.
Capital K, right? And so now what happens to this population? Someone mentioned that there are two fixed points, right? There's either n equals 0 or n equals this k, right? Why are we calling these fixed points? Catastrophe. Sorry?
We begin at these initial conditions, then they will stay there.
Yeah, that's it really. That if you start at those conditions or if you end at those conditions, you'll stay there forever, right? You stay fixed at those conditions, and that's a point, so it's a fixed point, right? And so that happens when n equals 0, right? Can everyone see that? And that happens at n equals k, right? So what does this mean? If I started off with a population that was sitting somewhere here in its population size, what happens to this population if I wait a very, very long time?
Move to the stable equilibrium.
So someone said it moved to the stable equilibrium. We haven't talked about what's stable and what's unstable here, right? So how do I figure that out?
Do a small perturbation. Check.
Do a small perturbation. What do you mean by do a small perturbation?
Go to K and then
Why should I go to K? I'm here.
right. If K is a stable point, then if you move little away from K, you should come back to K.
Okay, that might be true, but I'm here right now and I want to know whether I'll go this way or that way.
So the rate is positive. At that point, the rate is positive.
Right, at that point the population has a positive growth rate,
Grows.
so it will grow, and when it grows n will increase, right? So I go right instead of going left, right? And here,
Still positive.
yeah. So I keep going right. Here I keep going right. I keep going right. At some point I hit a rate of 0 and I stop. What if I started my population here?
That the rate is negative.
How do I see that the rate is negative? Yeah. This line actually goes on, right? And so this growth rate becomes negative, so I'll go left, right? I'll go left and I'll go left, right? And eventually I'll still end up here, right? So, so it seems like I'll never end up at 0. Will I? Unless I start at 0, I won't end up at 0, right? Because even if I put a little bit of individuals in my population, I'll have a positive growth rate and I'll move towards n equals k, right? And so these kinds of arrow diagrams really help us know where the population is growing, right? And this helps us classify these fixed points that we have. There are stable fixed points of this kind. How do we know that they're stable? If you go to the left or to the right, you'll come back, right? And that's when we can apply a perturbation and check. But really, you don't have to. Here in this case, you could go far away from it, and you still come back, right? And then there are other fixed points which, if you start away from, you'll never come to. And those are called unstable fixed points. And so there's this convention that we typically use, and this convention you'll also find in StroCats, that we typically label our unstable fixed points with these open circles and our stable fixed points with closed circles. And this will be useful in the later classes as well, right? So one thing that I want you to keep in mind is every time we are given some set of rules, we can convert that into a simple model, right? We can almost always try and ask what the per capita growth rate of this population does. And then we can always figure out if there are fixed points and whether they're stable or unstable. And over these next 4 classes, we'll be doing that all the time. Okay? Okay, can someone quickly tell me why we care so much about the per capita growth rate? So someone had the suggestion of taking a per capita growth rate, and I took that really seriously, but why? Why do we care so much about per capita growth rate? In other models in physics, we don't usually care about this quantity.
Because there's some sort of similarity. I mean, I would expect there to be some sort of similarity over the entire region.
What do you mean by some sort of similarity over the entire region?
You take one individual and you see how it behaves, and then you have a whole lot of people, and you would expect the population to be some of those, that behavior, right? So there it makes sense to see.
So we'll see very quickly that doesn't have to be true, right? Very quickly when we do Alley effect, we'll see that when you have more individuals, they don't necessarily behave like the sum of individuals. It's a good guess, but thankfully populations, unfortunately populations are more complicated than that, right? So why do we have to care about n dot over n? Is there something about populations that we know that you better look at this quantity? Sorry? to check if a particular population would go extinct. What would an extinct population look like here? At K.
When you have 0 as such.
Okay, so does everyone know what extinction means? You have no population, right? N equals 0. And so, yeah, it's true that n equals 0 at, is it true that n equals 0 at K? No, right? So the population does not go extinct here, right? So where does it go extinct?
When you have 0 as a
Yeah. Yeah, and so when you have no individuals, what should the growth rate of the population be? 0, right? And so is that okay? Yeah, exactly. N dot over n is not defined, right? So we have our model, which is n dot over n equals r times 1 minus n over k, right? And at n equals 0, you see that the population has a 0 growth rate, right? So it's really n dot over n is 0. And did that have to be the case? Why would it not be the case? Could you have a population where there were no individuals but had a positive growth rate or a negative growth? Is there spontaneous generation?
If there is in the model.
Okay, if there is in the model, it's true. I completely agree. Do we know of cases? Well, okay, I mean, I don't want to argue about religion here, but as far as we know, this has happened once and has not happened again, right? So typically, all population dynamics models will look something like this, right? They'll always have an n sitting outside multiplied by some function that we'll cook up to explain the kinds of phenomena that we see for that particular population, right? And the important thing is that this sits outside because this is the thing that ensures that the population doesn't grow when there are no individuals, right? So in some sense, we're putting in that by hand, right? And so because of that, this is often the thing that we'll care about. Yeah, so that's sort of how these population dynamics models are different. Okay, so this kind of thing has a name. It's called a phase portrait. And by phase portrait, I really mean something that tells us about the growth rate of the population as a function of the state of the population, right? So this over here is the state of the population, and we're characterizing the state just by knowing the number of individuals, right? The population size. And on the y-axis is what? The per capita growth rate. There's another really interesting thing that we often care about when we study nonlinear dynamics, which is to ask what happens to a model that we care about if you have some sort of external parameter that you can control that changes. Okay, and so in terms of population dynamics, often what we'll care about is the effect of the environment or the effect of the external environment. And so one thing that the environment might do is that it might impose an additional death rate. You know, the environment might be harsh, right, in some way, and that harshness might be something that changes. And so in some sense, you might have an additional death rate in the environment, let's say delta n, that depends on how harsh the environment is, right? The delta controls. This is, by the way, delta times n. This is the harshness of the environment. And you might care about what happens to your population as the environment becomes harsher or less harsh. Okay, so we can see very quickly what this does to our equation of logistic growth, right? What does it do? we have n dot equals Rn 1 minus n over k. And what should I do to include this effect of environment? Minus delta times n. Okay, and now I want to play the same game again. I want to draw and ask what happens to my face portrait. And so, can someone describe what happens to my face portrait? Does it stay the same? So, what do I need to draw my face portrait? I need my per capita growth rate as a function of n, right? I can do that. Does this look the same as this? Okay, so let's take a vote. Will my face portrait change? Okay, your options are of course yes and no. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, most of you think it will change. Can someone explain how it will change? It will shift down, right? Shift down by what amount? By delta, right? So that's what it look like once you do things. Does that change the fixed points? Yes? Both of them? One of them, right? Okay, so what happens to n equals 0? Still a fixed point. What about n equals k? Now it's not a fixed point. What's the new fixed point? Can someone test if it's k minus delta? Or something else? You can work with r equals 1. Yeah? Sorry? If n equals k, then you get minus delta, correct. So that means that if you were here and n equals k, you'd go left, right? Now let's change these arrows around. Let's draw the arrows for the blue case. In the blue case, if you're at k equals delta, you'd go left, right? Because your growth rate, your per capita growth rate is negative, right? And so you come back, and what's the point at which you'll match?
K into 1 minus delta by R.
Right, and if r is 1, then
K into 1 minus delta.
k into 1 minus delta. Okay. Okay, great. And is this fixed point stable or unstable? Okay, let's have a vote to see everyone. Is stable is up, unstable is down. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Stable, right? Okay. Why? Because you go to the right of it, you come back, you go to the left of it, you go up, and it's still a stable fixed point. Right? So in some sense, nothing really changed, right? You had two fixed points. One is stable, one is unstable. Yeah, the only thing that changed was that quantitatively now, your carrying capacity is a little bit, you saturate and you stop growing at a number that's not your carrying capacity, but some factor smaller than that, right? What's the big deal? Yeah, maybe nothing. So here's one interesting thing that we can do, is that we can draw something called a bifurcation diagram. To ask the following question: what happens to my fixed points and their stability as I change some parameter of interest, right? So in this case, the parameter of interest in our case is delta, which is the harshness of the environment. And on here, I can just plot basically the states, or in some sense, whether they're stable or unstable, we'll see. Right? And so what happens on this diagram when delta equals 0? There are two fixed points, correct? Right? So here I'm plotting n, what I can call n star, which is what happens to n, the population size at large time, and that typically we represent by this star. Okay? And so n star can be 0, correct? And that will be unstable, right? Okay, good. And what else? K, right? And K is stable, right? And now I can ask what happens as my delta gets larger than 0, right? And I want to know that for both of my fixed points, right? So let's just track things. Let's use the following notation. We'll make a solid curve to track the stable stuff, and maybe we'll make a dashed blue curve for unstable things. Okay, so what happens, let's just look at n equals 0 for a second. What happens is delta gets a little bit larger than 0. Is this still a fixed point? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so I continue drawing my dashed line, and I'll draw it a little bit above so that you can see. Okay, what happens to this, to n equals k? It decreases, and does it decrease linearly? Yeah, it decreases linearly, and it still stays stable. We work that out, so it will continue to be solid. I increase delta again, and it continues to increase linearly, or to decrease linearly, right? So just to draw another delta that's even lower in pink. If I lower it further, n equals 0 didn't change. This came here, right? The stable fixed point keeps moving left and left and left. Will it keep doing that forever? Till it reaches 0, right? And what happens when it reaches 0? Here it's decreasing again. And at some point, I have another color. At some point, this happens, right? And that's the point at which this line is 0, and all this while, what's happening to our blue line? This keeps marching on, and they meet here, right? The meeting is exactly this point. What happens this point onward? Does something special happen? What is half stable?
If you move in one direction, the perturbation will decay. If you move in another direction.
Okay, I don't know what you mean by perturbation. Could you be a little bit more specific?
So it's like a stable point. The rate of growth is still 0.
So yeah, so okay, let's think about it in this case. If our delta is somewhere here, what happens to the population at long time? It'll reach this point, right? So if I were to draw the same analogs of the arrows here, the arrows would look like this. Do people agree? Yeah? Yeah? And so if my delta was somewhere here, what would the state of the system be after a long time? Here, right? Okay. And so, when it's here, when delta is here, the population sitting here, what happens to By the way, what's this point? What's the value of delta at which they'll both meet each other? K, right? So that's K. Sorry? Should be 1 or K? Okay, 1. You guys are much better at algebra than I am. Okay, and what happens here to the population if I started off at some arbitrary thing? Yeah, it'll decay, right? It'll go extinct. Will it ever not go extinct? No, right? Why is that? Your per capita growth rate is never positive, right? And what happens beyond that? This line just keeps moving further down, right? And now what happens? How many fixed points do we have? 1, but what about this guy? This line still meets n at this point over. Yeah, so you can't have negative population sizes, but mathematically at least that's still a fixed point, right? And what happens to n equals 0? Is that still a fixed point? Ready? 3, 2, 1. That's still a fixed point. Is it still unstable? Okay, is it stable or unstable? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's seeing half the class saying stable, half the class saying unstable. So maybe take 5 quick seconds to convince your neighbor whether it's stable or unstable. No one wants to convince their neighbors. Okay, shall we take a vote again? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, most people still think it's unstable, is it? Is n, okay, good. The question is n equals 0 stable or unstable when my delta is large enough that's. Oh, sorry. Wow, sorry. Something like that. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, I would still say half the class thinks it's stable and half the class thinks it's unstable. Does someone want to have a debate? Maybe we can have one person taking the side of stability, one person taking the side of instability. Yes?
I'm saying unstable.
You're saying unstable, okay. Why?
Because at 0 the growth rate is negative.
At 0 the growth rate is negative.
So the population will decrease even. So
will decrease, but what do you mean by even more? So if you...
Because mathematically we are assuming that negative n can exist, so...
Yeah, so of course, you know, if n equals 0, then n dot is 0, right? It's a fixed point. If n is greater than 0, then growth rate is negative, as you said. So your population size should decrease and decrease until it hits 0.
yeah.
And what happens then?
If you are a little left of, little.
What would you mean to go a little bit left?
Your n is negative.
Yeah, but that
works under the...
yeah, so it's true that if you're considering the whole thing, then of course if you decrease it further, then you'll go away. But if you're really talking about non-negative populations, then it's stable. Okay, right? So good. So I would say this is stable if we consider real populations, right? And so is that true actually? What I just said? It's true, right? Okay. And so what should I draw here for this blue line? Should I continue to draw it as dashed? And what about this guy? Yeah. Okay, so in this case, what you can see is this at this point, something kind of special happened, right? What happened? Yeah, the first thing that happened is that both these fixed points collided with each other. And after that, they exchanged their stability, right? And so this is kind of a special point. It's called a bifurcation point. And we typically classify what kinds of bifurcations that we get. And so this kind of bifurcation, where fixed points exchange stability, it's called a transcritical bifurcation. And so if you read about bifurcations in Strogatz, you'll see more examples of this. Okay, so this sort of presents a template for how to think about any population dynamics model, or in fact any nonlinear dynamics model that you're given. You write down the corresponding equations, you try to work out a phase portrait, you use that to figure out what your fixed points are, figure out whether they're stable or unstable, and then you draw, you can often think about a bifurcation diagram to ask what happens as you change some parameter of interest. Okay, so let's try and work that out for another example. And hopefully then you'll see some similarities and differences. Okay, so thus far we've been talking about this, right? This kind of growth, which is called logistic growth, right? This has one stable fixed point, has some carrying capacity. The carrying capacity can change if you make the environment harsher or less harsh. This is not the only way that populations can grow on their own. So what was so special about this logistic growth? There were two fixed points, and n equals 0 was always unstable, right? That means even if you had a little bit of individuals to the population, even if you added 1, this population would grow and reach some carrying capacity, right? This can't always happen in real populations, right? Sometimes in real populations, there are some cases where the more the number of individuals, the better the population grows. Okay, so what I mean is the following. We were drawing a per capita growth rate as a function of the number of individuals, and that was always a decreasing function, right? Right, and so what that means is that the more and more individuals you add, it's always worse for the growth rate of any individual, right? And so sometimes what happens, this I would say is something that you would think of as purely competitive growth, right? All of the individuals are competing with each other, and the more and more individuals they are, the more and more they compete, and so the less and less the growth rate of any particular individual, right? You can also sometimes get what's called cooperative growth. And so in cooperative growth, what can happen is that there's some regime, some population sizes over which the growth rate of the population is actually, increasing with the number of individuals. The simplest way, if I were to draw it, would look something like this. Okay, but this, again, we learned cannot go on forever, right? Why can't it go on forever? The population will diverge, and so at some point it needs to come back, right? And again hit 0, right? And so this is perhaps the simplest case in which you can have some cooperative growth. Are you cooperative forever in this curve? No, right? There's some sort of boundary, some sort of population size below which you're cooperative. There is a growth rate increases if you add more individuals, and some other where you again go back to competitive. Why might this happen? Can someone give me some examples? Yeah, so they might start competing. Sorry, I should be more careful. What I meant was why might you have cases where there's a cooperative region? Can you think of some real examples where?
In some animals, like they will take care of other individuals' offsprings. So it's in a way helpful to have more like more organisms around.
Something like hunting in packs.
Yeah, group hunting is one example. Yeah, any kinds of group behavior would do it, right? Any other examples?
Fishes, those small tiny fishes, anchovies and herrings.
Yeah.
So they go in like large numbers to save themselves from predators.
Ah, right. Okay. So you're saying like predator avoidance, right? So if you like go in packs, it might be good for the collective because, well, I guess, yeah, only the fish at the. Okay. Yeah, that's a great.
Social insects where there is this existing social hierarchy, and for the species, they need to have that kind of a hierarchy. So for a hierarchy to exist, you need more individuals. So
Sure, but what impact would that have on the per capita growth rate? Because I think the ones that you're talking about, there's only usually one individual that reproduces, right? This queen or something like that. Yeah, but I mean, okay, yeah, basically any kind of organisms where group behaviors are involved, right? Anything else that you can think about which doesn't have animals, for instance? You think microorganisms can do cooperative things? Yes.
Symbiosis is one example of cooperative growth.
What do you mean by symbiosis?
So there are two organisms
Yeah.
in the system, and both of them depend on each other for their survival.
Yeah.
One example could be the cytoplasm. The cyto, I don't know the exact name, but it produces oxygen, cyanobacteria.
Yeah.
And there's another organism, I don't remember what, but cyanobacteria lives on an organism. And when it produces oxygen, it supplies it to the other organism.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I mean, so that's something that's just that's more of a case where there are two different species, right? And so, yeah, that's certainly something that can happen, this kind of symbiosis. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about two species systems. Today, we're talking about one species systems, right? So here we're talking about individuals or one population, right? So, yeah, yeast, what can yeast do? Growing on top of each other, like physically? Okay. I see. Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that example, but I know another example from yeast where basically they need to eat food and food comes as some sort of big thing, something like a polymer or something like that. And what the yeast have to do is that they have to secrete something to be able to break this big thing. And so if there's only one cell, it has a really hard time secreting enough things to break this big food source. But if there are more and more cells, they can all secrete a little bit, and then they all get the benefit out of it, right? But eventually that is not good forever, because if there are too many of them, then of course once the food comes out of the big thing, then they're a little bit confused about how to share it. Right, but okay, but group hunting, etc., there's lots of examples of this kind of cooperative growth, and so that's why often we need to account for it in our models. And in fact, this cooperative growth doesn't always have to look exactly like this. There can be even more extreme examples where you still have this kind of behavior in the orange, but it's so extreme that basically, unless you have a critical population size, the growth rate of the population is actually negative, right? And so, for instance, this group hunting might be sort of one example where you just have one lion or something like that, probably will have a hard time and will die, right? And so, typically, both of these examples come under what's called the alley effect. And so that's what people call it, for who discovered it. And there's a weak version of it, the weak alley effect, and a strong version of it. people see why it's weak and strong, right? Strong is so strong that basically below a certain population size, you're not growing. Is there any consequence to having a strong allele effect versus a weak allele effect? What happens to the fixed points for the weak allele effect? How many fixed points are there? Let's take a vote where we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Is the question clear? Okay. Okay, so I see most people saying 2. Yeah, and that's true. Can someone point out which 2? Yeah, why 0 by the way? Yeah, for n equals 0, you always have a growth rate of 0 here, right? And this one, right? And are both of them stable? How many of them are stable? Ready? 3, 2, 1. People confused? Okay, still don't see people voting, so I'll give you one more chance. So the question again is, in the weak allele effect, how many stable fixed points are there? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, most people seem to think there's one, and which one? This one, right? K. Let's call it K. And why is it stable? If you're to the left of it, you grow. If you're to the right of it, you die, right? And so this one's stable. This one's unstable, right? If you're to the right of it, you grow. Okay, what about the strong allele effect? So let's take a vote again. How many fixed points? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, there seems to be a mixture of 3s and 2s. Maybe take 10 seconds to talk to your neighbor about what you think the answer is. I really don't see people talking. Why is that? Okay, most people agree. I see. Okay, let's take a vote again. How many fixed points? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, most people seem to think it's 3 now. That seems to have worked. And which 3? 0. There's this guy, which we can call NC, right? N critical, which we didn't have before, and K, right? And how many of them are stable? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, yeah, 2, and which 2? 0 and K, right? So and so why 0? Because if you're to the left of NC, you go to 0. 0 is a stable fixed point. If you are at NC, of course, it's a fixed point. If you're to the right of NC, you grow. And so NC is an unstable fixed point, right? And then the next fixed point K is stable, right? And so do you see a big difference between what happened to extinction in the logistic model versus in the strong allele effect for n equals 0? Can someone point out? So n equals 0. In the logistic model, is it stable or unstable? It's unstable, right? And what about the strong allele effect? Stable, right? And so this, I would say, is one of the key differences between both of the models. What about the weak allele effect? It's unstable, right? So really, the strength of the allele effect can be so strong that n equals 0 can become a stable fixed point. And so really, that's sort of one of the big qualitative differences, right? How do we model this mathematically? What's the kind of equation that you might write down that gives you those things? What does these look like? These orange and pink curves? Right, they look like parabolas, right? And so one way to model them could be something like that, like with some r sitting over here. Right, and this is a quadratic equation, and that's an equation for a parabola. And of course, if r were negative, everything would be messed up, right? You'd get an upside down thing, right? So in this model, always we think of r being greater than 0. Okay, so that's our phase portrait. Right, so we present it with a model, we make our phase portrait, we point out our fixed points, we mark out which ones are stable and unstable. We're going to be doing this in the class all of the time, so better get used to it today. And then what did we do when we talked about the logistic growth model? We talked about this environmental harshness, right? So what do you think that'll do here? So now let's talk about a bifurcation diagram. And so I'll again do the same thing. I'll add some external death rate, delta, and it's a per capita death rate, right? That's why I added it like this. And again, I'm going to track. My parameter of interest is always going to be on the x-axis. That's delta. And here I'm going to look at what the state of my system is. And that's n star. And let's say we're talking about the strong alley effect. Okay. Something over here. So what do I need to do to get a strong alley effect here? So I need to set r greater than 0. Anything else I needed to do? NC greater than 0 and K is greater than NC, right? And so that gives us strong alley effect. What about weak alley effect? NC is less than 0, K is greater than 0, right? Right, because what that means is, there's still NC here, but it's sort of sitting over here, right? Okay, so what happens at delta equals 0? Let's mark things in 2 different colors. I'm going to take stable things as solid and orange, unstable things as dashed and blue. So how many fixed points did I have at delta equals 0? 3, right? Which 3? There was 0, that was stable, right? There was K, that was stable. And then there was NC, that was unstable, right? Do people agree? I'm just marking out whatever we did here, over here, and so we can even draw the same arrows that we drew. Do people agree? Okay, so now what happens when delta gets above 0? First of all, what happens in this diagram? Where's the dust? Yeah, the parabola shifts down, right? You see how we don't need to really solve any equation to say the things that we're saying? We're just literally drawing things. Right, so we had something for delta equals 0. When delta becomes larger, thing would go down. right? And what would happen to the fixed points? They'll come closer to each other, right? And so NC, so now the NC fixed point, will it go up or will it go down? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Up. Okay, good. Most people think it's up. Yikes, sorry. It goes up. Okay, and how will it go up? Will it go up like a line? Yeah, here's where you need to think about your equation a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so let's think about that as we make more of these parabolas, right? What about K? It'll go down, right? And will their stability change? Right? So this will remain, NC will remain unstable, K will remain stable, but go down in some way. We don't exactly know whether it'll go down as a line or as some sort of curve. What about 0? Still be stable, right? So that one's the easiest. And just get something that goes like this. Okay, what happens as I increase delta further? It'll go further down, right? 0 doesn't change stability, right? This moves further up. This moves further down. Do any of them change stability? No, right? Okay, and will this keep going on forever? I'm running out of colors. Okay, so you decrease it further, you'll get something like this until what happens? They're getting closer and closer and closer. And so what that means is they're getting closer and closer and closer. At some point they'll meet, right? And what happens at this point? One of them was unstable. It was unstable coming left. And it was stable going right. And now they meet and they collide again. What's the stability of this point right, so this one would be so-called half stable, right? Which is to say, if you start to the left, yeah, you'd go away. If you go to the right, you would come back, right? So this is kind of the way that I think most people make it, is something like this. It's stable on this side, so you color this half circle. And what happens after that? How many fixed points do you have then? 1, right? Which one is that? And is that stable or unstable? Stable, right? So sorry, this one should be filled circle. This one is stable forever, right? So the way to make it is stable forever. These things meet, and then after them they get lost, right? When delta is large enough, there's no fixed point in this region, right? Okay, so we still didn't discuss whether they'll go up like a line or whether they'll go up and down like a curve. So can someone make some argument about what's happening here and motivate? As delta is increasing by the same amount, see here I kind of made all the gaps similar, right? Are these points getting coming closer to each other faster and faster or slower and slower? Okay, are they coming together faster or slower? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, whoever I'm seeing voting, most people seem to think it's faster. And can someone say why faster? Yeah?
So earlier when we were shifting the curves for the previous case,
Yes.
We did calculate the fixed point. If I remember correctly, it was 3 times 1 minus delta.
Yeah.
So the increase in delta it should be faster.
Sure, yeah, that's a good argument, but you can also kind of see that the way that the parabola is, right? So as you go down, these points would come together faster and faster, right? So one way of making this is something like this. And at this point they will collide, and after that you have nothing, right? So and so in this case there's also a bifurcation point, right? It's this one, and you can calculate what it is, right? That you can call delta critical. And what happens to the left of delta critical? How many stable fixed points do we have? 2, right? So this is a region where you have what's called bistability for 2 fixed points. And to the right of it, you have 1, right? So you have only 1 stable fixed point. Okay, and so what is happening? Let's also make sure that we draw our arrow diagrams. So there's stuff going down here, stuff going up here. What happens here? Do the arrows go up or down? Down, right? And what happens here? We'll take a vote. Do the arrows go up or down? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. So using this, we can see that, okay, you know, when our environment was not so harsh, when delta critical was small, when delta was smaller than delta critical, your population could have been extinct, or it could have been not extinct, right? And so let's say that you're sitting here, your population sitting here, the environment gets a little bit harsher, yeah, you go a little bit to the right, fine, you have a little bit fewer individuals, you're fine. It's a little bit harsher, go here, still fine. A little bit harsher, you're fine again. What happens the next time it gets a little bit harsher? Right, suddenly the population goes extinct, right? And so this is a point at which something catastrophic happens to the population, right? But and then you lose that thing. But what's so special about it? Why should you care about this catastrophic point? Maybe you will just say, oh, you know, maybe at some point the environment becomes less harsh. Will the population go back? Why is that? 0 is still a stable fixed point, but it was also a stable fixed point here, right? Right, so if you are here already, and if you turn back and make the environment slightly less harsh, you will still sit here. What would you need to do to go back where you were? You have to reverse the but that's what we did, right? I reversed the conditions. Right, so someone said greater than a critical population. What does that mean? I'll have to introduce more individuals enough that I come here, right? Whatever the NC is for this particular point. And only once I do that will I be able to get sucked in and get back to my population, right? This is an effect we've seen before in areas of physics and stuff. It's a hysteretic behavior, right? And this is sort of very common to these kinds of things. And this is why it's what's called a catastrophe, right? And let's just dwell on this a little bit because, you know, it didn't have to be this way, right? And another way that you would get that you might get similar behavior in your bifurcation diagram is, let's say if you're plotting the state as a function of this environmental harshness, and you saw something that looked like this. Oh, sorry, this one also I want to be stable. And then, you know, whatever. Right? So in this case also, you might do the same experiment. You'll say your population is sitting here. You make the environment slightly harsh, it goes down. make the environment slightly harsh, it goes down again, and suddenly you make the environment harsh enough and it again goes back down, falls to zero, right? What's the difference between this kind of bifurcation diagram and this kind of bifurcation diagram? You're right that there's a discontinuity, but remember, I could always tune my curve over here to make it as close to discontinuous as I want, right? I can make this sharper and sharper, right? So the sharpness, I guess, is not, that I can always tune my curve.
On the right, the one curve is going and the two fixed points meet and then it continues on one of the curves, but on the left, you have two fixed points that are meeting and then both of them are gone and you fall to a completely different curve.
Sure, but I mean, surely if I were caring about the health of a population, I don't care about what fixed point there is or not, right? I might care about things like restoration, right? So, here we were talking about what happens if the population goes extinct and you try to restore the harshness of the environment, right? And here we agreed that if you restore it back, you will still get an extinct population. You'll really have to reseed a lot of the population to go back where you were. Would that be the case here? Right? So if you're here and you reduce the harshness of the environment, you can go back, right? Without having to do anything. Yeah? Yeah.
Can you explain that one?
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I'm just going to draw these arrows again so that we can see what's happening. Yeah. So here I am following the same convention. I am drawing a bifurcation diagram for a different hypothetical system, right? A system where also small change, like making the environment increasingly harsh, can result in me getting a sudden collapse of the population, right? So qualitatively, this part is the same here and here, right? I make a small change to delta at some point, and my population goes from being something to being nothing. Yeah. Here, in this case, now if I want, with this extinct population, if I slightly decrease the harshness of the environment, because this fixed point is unstable and this one's stable, I go back, right? So I just need to reverse back what I did. In this case, reversing back what I did is not enough. I also need to supply some more of the population, right? And that presumably that's what I'm lacking. Yes.
So even though that, like, if we have achieved the zero population,
yes,
the species is gone
yeah,
completely extinct.
Yeah.
Even though that's an unstable equilibrium, even if you're reducing the conditions, that will work.
True. You will have to add a little bit, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of sit here, and you go back up. But if you sat here, you wouldn't go back up. That's a difference. Yeah. So this is typically a very good model of what are called fisheries. And so in fisheries, you're fishing for fish, and you have a population of fish that are growing. And typically fish, someone was pointing out that fish schooling has this cooperative behavior. So actually this kind of strong alley effect model works really well there. And so typically what can happen is, what's the analog of environmental harshness in a fishery? The level of fishing, right? So at some point you might think, oh yeah, okay, I'm getting a bunch of fish, let me fish a little bit more. Okay, fine, I have, slightly fewer fish, let me fish a little bit more, let me fish a little bit more. Suddenly the whole fishery is lost, right? And so in this case, if I want to restart the fishery again, I can't put one fish in or two fish in. I have to put like hundreds of thousands of fish in to be able to restore the fishery again. Life would be much better economically if fish populations followed this kind of model, right? Then you would only have to, then you could fish as much as you wanted and then just put in one fish again and have things grow back, right? So these things have often consequences for the things that we care about. Yeah, is that clear, the difference? Yeah, so often people will talk about catastrophes, right? And so it's true that populations can decline catastrophically, but some kinds of declines we care about more than others, right? this kind of bifurcation is a different kind of bifurcation. It's called a fold bifurcation or a saddle node bifurcation. And which kind of bifurcation is this? This is a transcritical bifurcation, right? It's the same kind. I just modified the logistic curve to look more curvy. Oh, good. Yes, great question. So the bifurcation was really when you change the qualitative behavior and or the number of fixed points in the system, right? You go from a condition, here, what's happening on either side of the bifurcation is you're going from having two stable states to having one stable state. Okay, all right, so.
Just an ecological context of why this is useful in fisheries is because fishes exhibit, they're spatially distributed, so they're not able to find enough mates for mating. That's why it becomes negative. The birth rates are growth rates are negative till it reaches a certain population.
Perfect.
Not really because of schooling.
Not really.
So because of fish schooling, they group along and that really. It's not
sure. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Right. That I guess the schooling behavior is more when you're trying to avoid predators. Good. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Okay, good. So, these are, two ways of looking at different population dynamics models of one species, right? So we saw two qualitatively different things that can happen. And now you're more or less sort of ready to, every time you encounter some sort of model like this, what's the sort of recipe of what you need to do? You look at what the equation is, you look at the per capita growth rate, you try to make a phase portrait, look at what the fixed points are, look at their stability, and then if you want, you can look at something like a bifurcation diagram and ask what happens as some parameter that you care about changes. Right? And so you can go and try if you want what happens if this parameter R changes. You can try that at home, right? Just to sort of give you some sort of exercise. Okay, so in the last 5 or 10 minutes, I just want to quickly chat about this issue of discrete versus continuous time models. So both of these models that we were studying are continuous in time, right? Why do we say that? Sorry? Yeah. Right, so there's a d and dt here, and that dt is very small, right? And so that means that you're really able to evolve the population in very quick succession, right? And you might write, you might want to write down a slightly different model that accounts that is discrete in time, right? And so what kind of model might that be? Would you still get ODEs? No, right? You would get something like difference equations, right? So let's talk about that really quick. And so let's just look at and I mean, that shouldn't have that big of a change, right? Let's just say we're talking about the logistic growth again. Right, and we had some equation which used to be n dot equals n times k minus n. There were some odds and so on and so forth, but they don't change the behavior. Right? Let me just make some version of this that's discrete in time. Right? So let's say I'm tracking the population size with some x, and now I'm going to look at time in units of t plus 1 and so on and so forth. Right? So x of t plus 1, let me call that x of t times, r times some x of t times 1 minus x of t, right? Do people see the difference between these two equations? Let me just make this one to make this clearer. This goes discrete in time, right? Every time I have x at time t, I use it to calculate x at time t plus 1. Do I not do that here? Yeah, what do you mean we don't get the first equation in the limit of the second?
The different, making the time steps infinitesimally small and taking the limit. We should get the continuous thing. In this case, you don't get the continuous logistic growth equation, you don't get discrete.
Right. Okay. And then the why is that? Why do you not get this?
Like something like x at t plus 1 minus xt by some delta t should give n dot.
Yeah.
But you don't get that here.
Right. Yeah. That's true. You don't necessarily get that, but I mean, it has the same flavor as that equation, right? So you might say at least qualitatively it should do the same things that are the logistic growth that we were analyzing did. So does it do the same set of things? So this one had what? It had always one stable state, right? One stable fixed point. And if you change R, doesn't really change the stability or the instability, right? It just changes things maybe quantitatively. It doesn't even change things quantitatively here in terms of the stability or the non-stability. Here actually, it really changes things, right? So here, in fact, you don't have to get one stable fixed point. You can get oscillations, you can get chaos based on how you choose this R. So why is that, or why could that be?
In the discrete case, if we look at the equation itself, so what we did earlier in the continuous case was model the growth rate of the population, but here is the population at the next time interval itself, which has the same form as what was the growth in the previous continuous case.
Right.
So what we're saying is that the population at the next instance itself depends on the R. So that should actually be having greater consequences than the rate having being dependent on R.
Right. Yeah. So what this is really doing is that it's a map, right? It takes the population at time t and gives you a recipe of constructing the population at time t plus 1. Right. And it's still true that, of course, if this were 0 or 1, you'd stay there forever. But if you're somewhere else, then essentially, you have this sort of map that's taking you from one time step to the other, right? And that does a lot of different things. And in fact, if you want, we can spend a whole lecture talking about the logistic map. So, but here it turns out based on how you tune R, you can get all sorts of different behavior. And in fact, this really is because this map has this non-linearity. And so you can get a stable fixed point, you can get oscillations, and in fact you can also get chaos. We'll talk a little bit about all of these things later in the module. But yeah, just to sort of seed this fact that discrete and continuous time with these maps versus these differential equations can do very different things. Okay, so we are out of time, so I'll stop now. For next class, we'll share the readings soon. And again, it'll be the same thing that I mentioned before. There'll be reading, there'll be pre-class questions. Next class, we'll start talking about two species models. Yeah, so just to give you a map of where we're going, we did one species population dynamics today. The next class, we're going to talk about two species population dynamics, and in particular, we're going to talk about predator-prey models that some of you might have heard of. The class after that, we're going to talk about, again, two species models and where populations compete instead of being predators and prey. And we're going to do a little bit of a discussion of what happens when you do more than two. And the last class, we're going to really start talking about many species models, right? All right, if you have any doubts, or if you want to chat, I'm going to hang around for the next 15 minutes. Otherwise, I'll see you all on Friday.